welcome to our podcast on different types of characters, and in specific, static, dynamic, and foil pairs. Let's go ahead and see what we're talking about. So first off, just to define what we're talking about today, we're talking about a variety of types of characters. And so we will be mentioning dynamic characters, static characters, and then foil pairs. And then we tend to break down foil pairs into two types of pairs. Those pairs that remain at odds with each other, and those pairs that tend to become closer. And of course, we will explain each of these in a little bit more depth as we go. So first off, why do we even care about characters? Why would we bother studying them? Well, first off, characters advance the plot. In any sort of text and in any kind of story, we need to have characters do things. We can't just have a text setting where nothing happens. We actually need to have people or robots or some sort of character to advance and move that plot along. Additionally, as always, we like to study characters because their change or lack of change can help reveal the theme of a text. And since we are always looking for theme, which is that lesson or comment about life that the author is trying to make, then one of our tools in our theme toolbox is the idea of characters. How do characters learn? How do they grow? How do they not learn? How do they not grow? All of those things can be transferred to us as readers. And if we can see what they learn and grow from, then we can do the same. And so how do we find the different types of characters? Well, first off, we have to notice how the characters are introduced. What do we know about them right away based on what they say, what they do, what they think, and what other characters say about them? Those are all exceptionally important items to take note of when meeting characters for the first time. And then, as we continue to read through the story, see if any of those change. But when we do start a text, we have to assume that all characters are static until we see them change. And that ties into that idea of theme, that if a character is going to remain static, which you'll see in a minute are the characters who don't really change throughout a text, what does that teach us? Should they have changed? And if they didn't, why not? Perhaps we are supposed to learn the opposite. If we do see a character change, a dynamic character, for example, what caused them to change? What did they learn that caused them to grow and become a better person? And therefore, are we supposed to learn the same thing that they did? And the cool thing about texts is that if a character is going to change, the things that make them change must be revealed in the story. There's no way that we can have a character who is starting off on path A and then all of a sudden drastically switch to path B without us, the audience, being privy to what caused them to change. So we need to see that, whether we're reading a book or watching a movie, we need to see those things that cause the character to grow within him or herself. And then, as always, we have to put all of this together in that analysis mixer and come up with an interpretation. These steps come back time and time again in all of our podcasts, but here they are one more time. Number one, we have to identify our literary element. And so in this case, we're looking at characters, static, dynamic, and foils. We have to observe the characters and who they are and if they are changing and what's causing them to change and who isn't changing, and by golly, why not? We continue to recommend that tracking the literary elements in some sort of a note system is a good way to read texts until you become expert enough at them that you don't need to write down every step of the way. But again, even we as adults, we continue to write down in our own margins the important things that may help us interpret the text at the end. Number two, once we have observed and tracked and kept record of all the different characters or literary terms that we're looking at, we have to think about how that element is treated. Do we see a good character who continues to become even better? Do we have a bad character who becomes a good character? Do we have a jerky character who remains a jerk even at the end, even when he probably should have learned a lesson? We have to think about the literary element of characterization at this particular moment. And then finally, step three is we have to think about or analyze how we might be being pushed by the author to react to that literary term and how we are supposed to learn from it. This is the stuff that is not revealed literally in a text. When Forrest Gump doesn't really change, the author at the end doesn't tell us what we were supposed to have gotten out of it. We have to think about it. When Harry Potter does come to realize that he is the one who's going to restore some sanity to the wizarding world, what does he learn? What are we supposed to learn? This is where we have to think and put all of our mental tools to use in order to analyze and make a reasonable and valid interpretation. So let's look at each type of character in a little bit more depth. Number one, we have dynamic characters. By definition, these are characters who go through significant change throughout a text. And this is beyond just a character growing up. Really what we're looking for is a character who has significant learning about the world and potentially him or herself. Somebody who has matured, somebody who has seen a new way, somebody who has gathered some insights that the world has taught them. Those are dynamic characters because they go through some sort of fundamental personality or intellectual change and growth throughout a text. Additionally, usually the protagonists of stories tend to be dynamic characters. So those of you familiar with the hero's journey, think about that journey. Think about those steps. Think about the character whose journey we are following. If we have a character who goes out onto that journey, experiences great challenges, overcomes those challenges, and then returns home, he or she has probably grown, has probably learned, has probably changed. That's the kind of character we're looking at, somebody who is dynamic and who grows. And so how does this dynamic character then tie to theme? Well, when a character changes, we have to look at what causes him or her to change. What does he or she learn? And therefore, if the character learns something, what are we supposed to learn? That's the point of all of these literary elements. We need to see them in the text. We need to track them and follow them throughout all 200 pages of our book, and then ask ourselves, how is that character changing? How did they start on path A and end up on path B? How have they grown? What have they learned? How are they a better person? Or how are they a bad person now? Then we have to look at what caused that change. And then ultimately, we have to put all of that together and say, well, what did they learn? What did they experience and grow from? And therefore, what are we supposed to take away from that? Yes, we are not going to be in the wizarding world of Harry Potter, but we can realize that we have our own individual strengths, and that we do have a lot to offer society, just like he does. Therefore, as a dynamic character, Harry Potter learned something. Therefore, we can learn from that same idea of change. And so some examples of great dynamic characters throughout literature. Perhaps George from Of Mice and Men, Nick Carraway from The Great Gatsby, Queen Elizabeth from the film Elizabeth, Hermione Granger from Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker from Star Wars, Baby from Dirty Dancing. So let's look at one dynamic character in specific. Let's look at Anakin Skywalker throughout the first 6 films of the Star Wars series. At the very beginning, Anakin starts off as a young slave on one of the planets. Eventually, he is freed because he's able to win some sort of pod race. He then grows up a little bit as a young man. He then falls in love with Queen Amidala, and eventually he marries her. Throughout this period, he always has some challenges, because what main character isn't going to be challenged? There is a pretty negative, dark force in the universe in which he lives that keeps kind of pulling at him, works on the fringes of his life, and seems to infiltrate every once in a while. At one point in the 3rd movie, his mother dies, and that really starts to drive him over the edge. And eventually, a little bit later in that movie, he goes and kills all the young ones at the Jedi Academy. Quite a change from who he was when he started this film series. And then as we move into episodes 3 and 4, we see that Anakin becomes Darth Vader, that he has become the epitome of the dark side of the Force. And throughout episodes 4, 5, and the beginning of 6, it seems like Darth Vader is a pretty negative character. He has changed from this innocent young man into this horrendous leader for evil. But then finally, as we get to the end of episode 6, the Return of the Jedi, we're able to see that Anakin Skywalker breaks through this shell of Darth Vader that he had become. And Anakin Skywalker returns to doing good deeds. At the very end of episode 6, he ends up saving his son, Luke Skywalker's life. When the Emperor is throwing all the dark side of the Force at Luke Skywalker, Anakin throws the Emperor down that huge hole and saves his son's life. And in doing so, ends up dying himself. But the point is that Anakin serves as a dynamic character. Whether you look at it from good to bad to good, or just from bad to good, if you're looking at the last couple episodes, here is a character who has fundamentally changed. And so we as readers and viewers are supposed to look at this and go, what causes Anakin to change? What does he see that teaches him something? What does he learn? And therefore, what should we learn that is very similar to what this character learned? That is the dynamic character by definition and a tie to theme. Another important character for us to look at is the idea of a static character, and this is a character who does not go through significant change throughout a text. Oftentimes, these static characters help support the protagonist. So for again, thinking about the hero's journey, think about the allies stage. The hero or the protagonist is not going to go on this journey alone. Usually he or she is going to have little helpers along the way. And while the protagonist will probably become a dynamic character, those allies or helpers don't really change. Their only job in the text is to push another character further along that journey. So they themselves tend not to change all that much. Oftentimes, though, we see that the antagonist, that force or character who is acting opposite our hero, is also a static character. And so how does a static character as a literary device help tie to theme? Our job as readers is to pay attention to who is and who is not changing as characters. And when we finally understand that we have a character who has not changed, we have to ask ourselves, why does he or she not change? Should he or she have learned something? Should they have gotten better at something? That's probably what we're going to see in terms of a static character. As we look at that and track how they don't change, we examine why they did not change and then apply that to our own lives and say, hey, if they should have learned this lesson, maybe I should learn that lesson instead. And that item that we're probably supposed to learn that the static character did not, that is oftentimes the author's theme, their comment about life, as revealed by somebody who does not change, a static character. And so some examples of great static characters throughout literature. We have the principals from The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller. We have Marge from Fargo, Mary Poppins, Dobby, and Dory. Let's be specific with one static character, Ferris Bueller from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Throughout the entire text, Ferris's only real goal is to have fun, to not work too hard, and really enjoy life. And so we see from the very beginning of the movie when he's tricking his parents, trying to convince them to let him stay home from school, that that's who he is set up as. As the movie progresses, everything Ferris does is geared towards getting out of school, staying out of trouble, but just messing around and having a good time. Whether it's taking his friend's car, whether it's coming close to being caught by his father throughout the entire time they're in the city, whether it's ditching school at the baseball game, going to the art museum, actually being in the parade. All of those times, Ferris remains the same character. By definition, he is a static character. So then we have to ask ourselves, well, what are we supposed to learn from his inability to change? Perhaps this is a little bit of a devious message that, you know what, sometimes you do need to step aside from the hard work and just have a good time. I think Ferris does teach us that from the fact that all the obstacles in his way, he continues to stay super focused on just having fun. But regardless, we have a literary device of a static character who does not change, and then we are able to learn a little lesson from his not changing. So the third type of character we'd want to look at is the idea of a foil pair. And so by definition, a foil pair is a character who contrasts and clashes with another character. And so that makes the pair. And the point we want to make is that these characters need to fundamentally clash with each other. Not just be different, as in like, oh, that person is 2 years older than the other character. But a foil pair really needs to clash. And as we tie this to theme, their contrasting, clashing nature helps to highlight the quality of each character. And because of that, that helps to highlight the eventual theme of that novel. We also break foil pairs down into two different subsets. One is a pair that remains at odds, meaning two characters who clash at the beginning and then continue to clash at the very end of the text, meaning that throughout the course of the text, they continue to remain at odds with each other. And then the other foil pair that we look at is the idea of a pair that comes together and learns from each other and becomes closer by the end of a text. So as always, how does a foil pair then tie to theme? If a foil pair remains at odds, such as Harry Potter and Voldemort, why do they remain in conflict? Should somebody have learned something? And if they should have learned something, yet didn't learn something, and that keeps them at odds with each other, then is that a lesson that we, the reader, can learn? That is probably theme. When we have that example of a foil pair who becomes closer, meaning that they start off very black and white, very at odds, very clashing, but that throughout the course of the text, they become a little bit more friendly toward each other, they become a little bit more similar in nature, perhaps even taking on qualities of the other character. What causes them to become closer? What do they learn, not only about themselves, but about their foil pair? And therefore, if they do learn something, we are supposed to learn something. And whatever we're learning, that is theme. So some examples of foil pairs who remain at odds. Again, Harry Potter and Voldemort, Atticus Finch and Bob Ewell from To Kill a Mockingbird, Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader in episodes 4 and 5, George and Lenny from Of Mice and Men, Hannibal Lecter and Agent Starling from Silence of the Lambs, Nurse Ratched and McMurphy from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and then Dorothy and the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz. But then we also have examples in literature of foil pairs who become more close to each other and learn from each other and maybe take qualities of the other person throughout the course of a text. Nina and Lily from the movie Black Swan, Riggs and Murtaugh from the Lethal Weapon series, perhaps the characters from the movie The Heat, Piggy and Ralph from Lord of the Flies, Mater and Lightning McQueen from Cars, perhaps the characters from Nothing to Lose, or even Elphaba and Galinda from the musical Wicked. And so a great case study to look at is from the text Hot Fuzz, the British cop movie, where Nicholas Angel, a very successful police officer in London, is transferred out to a small country town where he meets Danny Butterman. And at the very beginning, these two are in complete contrast. Angel is the perfect police officer. He does everything by the book. And then he is partnered up with Danny Butterman, who works in this small town, and he is the complete opposite. He is a complete idiot. In fact, the first time they meet, Angel actually arrests his partner Butterman for trying to drive while drunk. So they are the complete opposite. Therefore, they are a foil pair. But as the two begin to work together, each learns a little bit about himself, and each learns from the other person. Angel becomes a little bit more lax on certain things. He begins to cut corners. He begins to relax a little bit, and he learns that from Butterman. And then Danny learns to be a better cop. He takes better notes. He thinks more deeply about stuff. He begins to follow more rules. And then he changes by the end. And so we look at this as a foil pair that begins to come together. The characters learn about themselves from each other, and learn about each other in that process, then we as a reader can look at that and go, if they're learning that lesson, then I should learn a very similar lesson. And that ends up being the theme. So just to summarize, we do look at 3 different types of characters: dynamic, static, and then foil pairs. And those characters' change or lack of change can help reveal theme. So we really need to look at what the characters are or aren't learning, and then see if we can apply that to our own lives. That is theme. That's it for now. Thanks so much for listening. As always, if you have any questions, bring those into class. Otherwise, thanks, and we'll see you soon.